Right, good afternoon all, and welcome to the Planning Committee. And first item on our agenda is, are there any apologies for absence?
I have not any yet, Chairman.
No, thank you. Item 2, any disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests?
Yes, Chair. I wish to declare prejudicial interest in item 2, land at Upper Bank, Pentrequeith. And
Yeah.
I'll fill a form in and send it off now.
Yeah, thank you. I got a personal interest.
So I'll be leaving the meeting for that item.
Yeah, I got personal interest in just know the applicant. So, thank you. Item 3 is to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting as a correct record. You'll start at page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. So move that as a true record, please.
I move, Chair.
Thank you. Item 4, is any items for deferral or withdrawal?
No, Chairman, at this stage.
Okay, thank you. So right, we move on to item 5, is the determination of planning applications under the Town and Country Planning Act of 1990. And the first item on our agenda is what we deferred from the last meeting, which is item 1 on page 8, is 260 Hoysmouth Road. It's in Lear, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this planning application was referred at your last meeting, whereby members had asked for some exploration of issues, specifically to allow the applicant to explore some of the concerns raised with social services, consider impact on schools and play provision. As you'll note in the report, we've provided reference to these issues. It starts on page 23 of the report, so there's basically a summary of those issues, and there's a table there in there as well. So in addition to that, at appendix 1 and 2 of your report, there is the social services market position statement, and the applicant's supporting statement is at appendix 2. In terms of the first issue, officers note the applicant has been in discussions with social services. However, the position in respect of social services remains unchanged, as set out in your report there, the synopsis of the discussions. In terms of concerns about potential strain on education services, officers are of the view that this particular scheme would not place undue stress or strain on services in education terms. And this would not be a scheme we'd ordinarily seek a Section 106 agreement on. We've undertaken consultation with our education department. They've set out basically the children may not actually be placed in the catchment school, and much would depend on the circumstances arising at the time. So they've given some information on schools in the locality with unfilled places, and whilst noting members had some requests for 106 contributions, officers didn't feel that that would actually meet the SIL tests for being necessary, directly related and reasonable in scale and kind to this particular development. This isn't a new build property. We have to have regard that it's not the same in that fashion, that it doesn't bring the same impact that, say, for example, a housing site would bring, where you've got demand for school places from a number of houses and children that could come into the area. This has to be weighed up against the fact that this is an existing premises. It could be used as a large dwelling. There could be 6 children, there could be less, there could be more. Effectively the fallback is this is a large property that could be used as a dwelling, and it wouldn't be one we'd normally ask for a 106 contribution on the basis that you'd normally use that sort of control where you're seeking to offset harm from a development. Well, we don't feel that in itself it would place any harm. And looking at the figures in the table provided by education on page 24, there's a number of unfilled places in the local schools. So it's hard to evidence that this itself would bring an impact that we would be seeking a contribution for. Finally, there were some concerns raised about outdoor space provision, and there was some discussion in that respect. Now, the applicant has provided a statement in response to that in there. So it's actually in the appendix, and it's also on page 25 of your report. So officers have just summarised the applicant's comments there that are in their statement. Basically, they've made reference to the outdoor space. I mean, you can see it on the plan there. We discussed it last time. You know, we got the parking area, and you've got a small piece of land then in between the rear wing of the property and the wall. There's a photograph being provided by the applicant as well, which should be in towards the end of your presentation slides. So yeah, there's a photo there. You can see the area. You know, it is essentially a small courtyard, and that is the existing provision. So as I said before, you know, it could be used as a dwelling house at the moment, and you know, albeit now they're proposing a children's home. I think there is another photograph on the next slide, just to see it in context there. So the applicant, they said it would be painted in a child-friendly approach, and as an organisation, they provide one-to-one support and a range of tailored activities, which they've summarised on. We've summarised on page 25. So, you know, they're basically saying, well, these are the activities that they would be carrying out with the children in the area. So that is that really. So really, in summary, the planning situation, it hasn't changed since the last recommendation, and officers remain to be considering that this is an acceptable development, having regard to planning requirements within your LDP. So there's clearly concerns here raised about whether this is an appropriate site for a children's home. But this is an area that's covered under separate legislation. The applicant would need, as I set out previously, they'd need to secure approval from the Care Inspector at Wales. What we need to be focusing here on in this particular application, and the primary consideration for members, is whether a C2 use of the property, which covers the personal care of children, is acceptable in this location. Now, in planning terms, it's a residential area. You know, the property is in a densely populated urban area. The residential uses located along Oysterbrook Road and the Sandfields area. There's flats immediately next door to the property. It's in keeping in that sense in the mix of properties in the area. You know, there is a large. It's not distinctly different from a large residential property in that respect. A guest house, a hotel, a HMO, or a cluster of apartments, and we looked, you know, at the last meeting in terms of the planning history and the approval for HMO use of the property. In planning terms, land use, it's largely very similar to a HMO or, you know, a large residential property. So we just need to be mindful really that the planning authority isn't the regulator of care homes, and this is a matter that's covered under separate legislation. So social services, they've cited reasons why they would not utilise it as a care home. And we respect that, and that's been relayed and considered here. But we feel it wouldn't be a good reason to refuse planning permission when the nature of the use is acceptable on this planning grounds. So really, I'd put it back to members. You know, we've tried to explore some of these issues, and I understand the applicant's going to be speaking today as well. But our recommendation remains one of approval, as set out in your report. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Liam. And first off, John is the objector. Welcome, Joanne, and would you like to now address the committee?
Hi, everyone. I would just like to reiterate what I said in the last meeting. As a community, we deeply object to the location of the children's home for many reasons. As I said before, the location is placed in front of a very busy road, right in the mix of hotels that are currently housing many vulnerable adults with addictions. They would be subjected to seeing these adults abuse drugs, alcohol on a daily basis, as we do in the community. It was very reassuring that the social services also objected and put the safeguarding of the children first, of course. What I didn't get to ask in the last meeting was why the owner, Mr. Lynch, was advertising the property already as a B&B. This was advertised before our last meeting, if he intends it to be a children's home. Also, as a community, we'd like to know where the children would come from. Obviously, as the social services would not recommend this place to be a children's home, and who and with what qualifications would be running the home. We just feel as a community it's more about money and not the safeguarding of the children being placed there. Parking on the narrow lane is another issue that we have. They say they have 2 parking spaces, but again, as obviously that is taken away from the outdoor space for the children as well. So as a community, we really hope that this application is denied. I know you say about it not being a planning, but it starts here. So if it is granted that it is a C2, it started here. And to be honest, as I said, there are many issues and potential dangers for the children in the location that it's placed at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then we have the applicant then is with us, Joseph Pasha. With us.
Hello.
Hello.
I
You have to address us, Mr. Pasha?
Yes, I just want to start by going through some of the finer points of the social services made and the discussion made with social services. So basically, one of the points were can I support children outside? Surplus amount of children's homes in Swansea. That was one of the points raised. After obviously, you can probably see in the appendix, I've written a complaint to social services, and then the next day, then we received I received a telephone call for discussion regarding these points that were made. They stated on there's about 54 unused beds in the area of Swansea. When I spoke to, I think it was Chris Francis, about the mixing process and how that will affect the number of beds become available. And then we moved on towards another company that's closing their fifth. I think they got 57 beds they transferred into disability, how that will affect their numbers. And also in regards to obviously the pandemic and liking it to the financial crisis in 2008, where there was a 30% increase in need for children's placements. That also respectively couldn't be calculated within the figures. I just want to stress to everybody, the reason why we want to open up a home is I work in the sector, and I've worked for various different companies in different roles working with children, challenging behaviour and vulnerable. I've worked in some good places, I've worked in some not so great places, and I find a lot of companies like I mentioned are profit based, and they're looking just basically to tick the box on the individual that comes through their service, and that is it. We're only looking to offer a one-to-one service, and the reasons why is because of the level of support that these children need. They can't be left multi-staffed. They do need that one-to-one service. They need to build on their emotional development, their health and well-being, and get out in the community and achieve what they want to achieve in regards to, maybe they want to swim, or maybe they want to attend classes and things like that. So in a multi-house scenario, like most of the other children's homes in Swansea, the children aren't able to do that on a daily basis, because other children obviously take priority, whether it's contact or whether it's different requirements or things like that. They're not able to actually get what they want out of the placement, and I think sometimes if it reflects badly on the child, then whether they're not able to develop and things like that. So what we're aiming to do is, because I've been involved in these type of services that are basically just about tick the box with CIW and just about do enough. The reason why we want to open up this home is to make it a solid difference, actually do offer the one-to-one service and actually get positive outcomes from children. So in regards obviously to the surplus amounts of beds in Swansea, after we talked about they looking to sort of increase their foster placements and put money into more foster placements and sort of limit the need for residential care. My question was, why is the increase in residential placements increased over the 2 years? And they said that the scheme is new and that they're still working on sort of finer parts of the foster placement new scheme, but yet the numbers have increased. So in terms of placements needed, they're not actually able to make a reduction in these numbers going up. If the next comment, is cannot support children from outside of Swansea demand and educational needs. So, for example, if we had a child from Neath Batalbot, or we've had a child from, for argument's sake, Bridgend, they talked about, obviously already covered previously, was the number of placements available in schools. The other point was about funding and where's that money coming from. Social services said they cannot support obviously the demand for the educational needs, where the funding comes from the placing authority. So that would have an adverse effect on Swansea as itself. We obviously questioned the unsafe area and likely to be commissioned by Swansea Social Services. They made a statement of that. What basically I asked is what they've done to evaluate the area and what they've done to make that comment. And basically, what they said was they haven't actually done any investigation about the area. They haven't actually raised any data or anything like that to justify or create validity to the comment. So when I reflect, they prefer to be slightly more rural, as they said, ideally, but they haven't decided not to commission us or commission us. So they haven't actually decided what they're going to do with us in terms of sending us placements. When I reflected on other properties and other areas where I've worked, where I would class as a lot worse than the Sandfields, that they weren't able to, obviously that there's a bit of an area where if they're able to commission these areas, why are they not commissioned?
Please. Can I ask you to wind up now, please? You're already on 7 minutes.
Oh, right, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That is it, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And next is one of the local ward members, Councillor David Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman. I call this application to committee, and I outlined my arguments why committee should, I believe, refuse the application. And the copy of my statement, I think, was circulated to at the last meeting, so I won't repeat those points in full. But if I could summarise them, I've no objection in principle to a children's home in Sandfield. The City and County of Swansea Social Services would not use the facility as Swansea was already over-provided with this type of provision, currently 90% over-provided, rising over the next few years to 185% over-provision. And that spare capacity being taken up by children from elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Sorry, let me move that. Some from a considerable distance away, and that is not actually good practice. But more importantly, social services go on to say at point 4 that Swansea cannot support the complex needs of the ever-increasing number of children coming into the city from other parts of the United Kingdom, and that our services are already at capacity, and creating further demand for these services, education generally, special school placements and mental health facilities, for example, can only exacerbate existing provision problems. And all of that's got to be paid for by the City and County of Swansea, not the Child's Home Authority. That the location is on a 4-lane highway, one of the busiest roads in Swansea, and is thus unsuitable. That approval will remove the need for housing for local people. Tourist holiday use would be more suitable. That the applicant's suggestion for the management of car parking are frankly unrealistic, given the number of staff who will be on site during the day at any one time. At that previous meeting, Chairman, committee members raised issues of their own, questions that remain unanswered, but I want to return to a couple of these. Firstly, the social services matter. I noticed that the applicant has argued the point of social services, but hasn't demonstrated, to me at least, that the figures provided by social services of the provision in Swansea is wrong. You might want to open a home, but it is clear from what our officers say, and I'm frankly more inclined to believe the social services department, that we will not be using that facility, and it will therefore be used by children from out of town, out of country in many cases. I want to return specifically to the 106 agreement. Unfortunately, the reasons that I asked for this at the last meeting have been misunderstood by officers. And as stated in the report, in fact, they're wrong. While I did refer to general educational provision, I was more particularly referring to the other specialist services which will almost certainly have to be provided by these children, to these children. The report only refers to general education, specifically school places. It does not address all the other services which our social services are already at capacity. I'm talking about psychiatric care, all the other things that are listed in their objections, as well as the specialist education services that are not provided at the local primary schools. Whether these services are at capacity or not, they will still have to be provided by the City and County of Swansea and paid for by the Swansea taxpayer in order for this business, which is what it is. It's not a charitable institution, this is a business. We will be paying to provide services so that this business to fund and create private profit. And I don't think that's reasonable. And that's why I wanted the 106 agreement. The 106 agreement being an estimate of the amount of contribution generated by taxpayers in Swansea to the provision of services to a company, and that is the council is recompensed for those services, and regrettably that's not been done. And I consider that a Section 106 agreement for those reasons is of merit in occasions such as this, but I do accept that members need to have the correct information. The idea of a 106 agreement, original as it might be, should not be rejected on the partial information provided here. I do not agree with the officers that it's not appropriate. I think it's entirely appropriate. But if I could finish by raising two new matters. The relevant regulations governing children's homes only allow registration to suitably qualified people or organisations who can demonstrate competence in such service delivery and are properly qualified. This application is in the name of an individual. However, confusingly, the comments attributed to the applicant consistently refer to we, our organisation, our ethos. Who or what is this organisation? And why is it, as it is presumably the final provider of the service, not actually the applicant for the planning permission? And another confusion, which is referred to by the member of the public who spoke earlier, is that Angela has advertised this property on Airbnb as a holiday let at £300 a night. Now, yes, thank you, Chairman. Committee might be forgiven for taking the statements of the applicant with a pinch of salt, or at least knowing what is the background to all of this. The interesting point being, Chairman, that if permission is given this afternoon for this to be a children's home, that Airbnb use would presumably be now beyond the regulations and not permitted. So I'm urging the committee to refuse the application. But if I could add, Chairman, if they're minded to approve it, I ask for two further conditions. That no residence parking are permitted to the property. I ask this specifically as I am aware that residence permits have been purchased by staff at another facility in the ward, purchased by another facility in the ward for staff. And that permission is made subject to a Section 106 agreement to be agreed subsequently to this meeting regarding all those types of services that Swansea Council will or could be obligated to provide. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And next speaker is then Councillor Jen Rayner.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to comment on the education data in this report that you are being asked to consider as part of the planning application for a children's home. Following negative comments about the Education Department at recent planning meetings, the Director of Education met with the Chair of Planning and followed this up with a letter which I hope has been shared with members. In this report, you have been given capacity information on places at local schools. In the report, section Officer Update to Councillors, number paragraph 2, and I'm sorry, I don't have the page number on the editions I've downloaded. The report notes that the Education Department states that the children placed in this home may not be placed in the catchment schools for 260 Oystermouth Road. The children are looked after children, not able to live at home with their mother or father, not able to be placed with a wider kinship network, and not able to be accommodated for a variety of reasons in their own locality or county. Elected members as corporate parents, and some as active members of the Corporate Parenting Board, are aware of the damage to children arising from adverse childhood experiences, which lead them to become looked after by a local authority. These adverse experiences include being taken away to a strange home and can lead to behaviour, emotional and social difficulties, specific learning needs and speech and language difficulties and communication needs and counselling services. Looked after children are more likely to go missing and need police support to find them before they are exploited. None of this is the fault of the child. I wish to emphasise that. However, this can mean a place at the nearest school is not necessarily in the best interests of the child, who may need additional support to resolve the issues arising from their life history. The response from social services in the main body of the report and the appendix makes it clear there is a need for therapeutic and specialist support, not a one-to-one offer, which this present developer is making, and there is no prospectus for any local authority to identify what sort of facility it will be and what children and what problems will be considered for placement. Every year, councillors approve the admissions policy to our schools at a full council meeting. In cases of overprescription, children who are in the care of a local authority, any local authority, have priority. In mainstream schools, we have a number of specialist teaching facilities who support children with additional learning and support needs. They are all under pressure for places, especially those providing places for autistic spectrum disorder pupils. We are responding to local and known need through the consultation on creating more places, following approval by Cabinet in March of this year to go out to consult. I strongly suggest that the summary of education information you have in the planning report is misleading for this particular application and does not provide the important information necessary to consider the impact on education. A home for children is not about bums on seats, filling the rooms and covering the bills. We do not need just places. There is no business plan with this application, and many of the facilities which are required now require 3-to-1 support 24 hours a day. How is that going to be squeezed into this building? All the evidence suggests that looked after children require and deserve additional support. Summarising spare capacity in local schools does not meet the evidence criteria. And as the department has pointed out, people attending this facility may not go to the local catchment schools. Their needs may be greater. In the appendix, the developer refers to tutors where there can be safe learning spaces. As been mentioned already, the property, including photographs, is available to view on Facebook. I can see no space in this building for separate learning facilities, apart from in the child's bedroom, which I do not think safeguarding would support. In summary, I would suggest you have insufficient information to proceed with this application, and it should be deferred pending further information on which children will be attending and what their needs are. It is quite normal for facilities such as this to provide a prospectus specifying the specialisms they will be offering. It is not just to be used to dump children that are difficult to place elsewhere. Thank you.
There are two hands up there now. Councillor Mary Jones first.
Thank you, Chair. And I actually want to pick up some points from Councillor Rayner, actually. I think what we felt in the last meeting was there wasn't a sufficient picture of us to be able to make the kind of decision because there hadn't been any input from education, and not their fault. It hadn't been asked for. And you've just highlighted the very point that I was trying to get at. We weren't talking about local schools particularly, although they were mentioned. It was the specialisms that these young people may need, and I still, like yourself, feel we haven't got that information. The other thing was, I got some other points. I thought we were one council. I thought that was the umbrella that we worked under, and when social services give us a list of things that they're not happy with, then I'm sorry, I can't understand why we're not listening to it, because we are the planning committee, because that encompasses people's lives. As the late Councillor Alan Lloyd used to say, this is about people's lives, and this is not what we're meeting here. We're looking at this too clinically. The other thing I wanted to make a comment about, the parking, 2 parking spaces. We're told it's 5 children, could be 6 children. The point being, if it's 1-to-1 and you have 6 children, that to me is 12 people. You've got 2 parking spaces. There are no buses running outside. You have to walk to the bus station. Now, how many people are going to do that after a long walk? I'm sorry, but the parts of the report just aren't credible in as much as that it's not what happens in real life. So there is no room for parking. And the last one, I'm sorry, I thought it was some kind of a joke. The outside amenity space. We will put basketball hoops up, or we'll have nets. And when you saw the photograph, well, I'm sorry, you'd just be touching the wall. It's a nonsense. That is not outdoor meaningful space. And I'm sorry, I think the whole thing is not suitable for a children's home with children with complex needs. And also, as Councillor Rayner said, there doesn't seem to be an amenity space inside. They would have to work in their bedrooms. And I too have seen the photographs of this wonderful building, which it is, and it's really well done up. But I'm sorry, I don't think it's well, what they've done it out as is not a children's home. Children do deserve the best, but there was no room to put a desk in some of the rooms. So I'm really struggling to see how we can approve this because there's still so many unanswered questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnshaw.
Thank you, Chairman. I support what's been said by the councillors so far, but I still have a number of concerns. Mary has raised the matter of parking and 1-to-1 supervision, so there is a need for more than 2 parking spaces if you have 5 or more children with 1-to-1. I'm also concerned about children being enticed by the beach opposite and just running out onto a busy road. I'm unhappy about the impact it's going to have on other council services, as Councillor Rayner has raised and Councillor Phillips, for social services and education. Can I ask the officers, it was stated earlier on that approval has to be made by the Care Inspectorate of Wales. if this is refused, what happens if we do go ahead and say yes today to the children's home?
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Councillor Richard Lewis.
Chairman, this came up a couple of weeks ago when we had our last meeting, and I spoke at that, and to be quite blunt about it, at the time, I thought this was the most ill-conceived business in a location which is not suitable. Certainly, the ward member is totally opposed to it, and I think we should support him. And as far as I'm concerned, I could not possibly vote for this. I would have to vote against it, but I was a few minutes late getting onto the website, and I shall be abstaining. But if I was going to vote, I think I actually wonder who came up with this idea of from the planning department for approval. I certainly wouldn't like kids living in that particular place, not in the location. The play area is so small, you couldn't swing a cat in it, and I would certainly disapprove of it. But I will certainly abstain. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mike Lewis. Mike. Councillor Des Thomas then.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think our initial reaction when we saw this planning application was, wow, this is the wrong place for a children's home. But we've got to separate the remarks of the Social Services Committee to those of the planning officers, and they're completely different, and there's different bodies dealing with different aspects of the site, and we can only hope, I think, that the social services side of things will see the sense that this isn't a suitable home for children. As regards the siting, I think we need to come up with planning reasons if we're going to move refusal for this application. And one of the reasons, as I see it, next door on one side there is a hotel. Now, I'm sure hotel guests wouldn't like to be to have the noise of a children's home coming through the walls from the establishment next door. It doesn't say what's on the other side. Well, if it's a residential, or any kind of residential or a hotel would have similar problems, I would suggest. The other things are the number of activities that are offered to the children, and you know, that's commendable. But it also says they offer a one-to-one service. So if you relate the number of activities to the number of staff required to provide those activities, that certainly means that there are more than 2 parking spaces needed. If I can refer members to the old Danacoid establishment, which used to be an education establishment in West Cross, that is currently providing education provision for children in need, children of various needs. And at the time of the application, we were assured by the applicants that there were sufficient parking spaces. Now, on that site, there are a large amount of parking spaces. There must be, I don't know, 18, 20, 24. Believe me, every day, the whole surrounding area is swamped with staff parking, with all sorts of issues for the residents there. You know, as local members, we're having continual complaints of the lack of parking for that establishment. So if we can relate 2 parking spaces for this establishment is just not sufficient, and it will cause problems to the surrounding residents of the area. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Mike Lewis, are you back with us?
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. No, as Des just preempted most of the things I was going to say, but what I'd like direction on. I fully take on board what the local member and the cabinet member for education have said, but to my mind, this is a planning application on the building only. And as Des has related to, we as a committee have to look at this application from a planning perspective only, and under the two-stage voting, which will come if it is refused, we have to supply a valid planning reason for refusal. And I think Des's comments previously have alluded to that and suggested a reason that could be used. It is a very difficult decision, this particular one, because on one side of my mind, I'm looking at it from a planning perspective, and on the other side, I'm looking at it with my heart. So I haven't completely decided as to which way I would lean to vote as yet. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Next then is Councillor Linda Tyler-Lloyd.
Yes, well, I was interested in hearing what Councillor Jennifer Rayner had to say. I wanted to base my decision on what she had to say and on the social services. And I just do not feel comfortable and happy that this is the right place for a children's home. I was listening to the World Service last night at 1:30, and they were talking about the fact that they were closing down a site of, well, I'm not going to go into it, but it sounded quite nasty, but it was vulnerable children. And I was thinking that's what we must protect, is vulnerable children. And if, as you say, if there's a hotel one side or the other side, and these vulnerable children could be picked on so easily, I just do not think it's the right place. Apart from running across the road and everything, I'm just worried about children being picked on by vulnerable children, sort of being drawn into something that they've got no idea what they're being drawn into. And so therefore, I think that listening to the social services, listening to Councillor Jennifer Rayner, I cannot vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I totally agree with Councillor Mike Lewis. We've got to look at this on the planning grounds. Are all the things that have been said by various speakers today, whilst very important and very valid comments, don't underestimate any of it, but are they material planning considerations? In other words, we've got to judge this application as before today on planning grounds. Now, one of them would be off-road parking. Is it adequate? The size of the premises, it's not it's a large house, no bigger than an ordinary dwelling. So I've listened to the officer on the parking, and they say it's adequate. So it'll be interesting to see what the officer comes back with on the comments that have been made. But I go back to it's got to be a planning reason before we can refuse this application today.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Cyril Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to reiterate Councillor Des Thomas and Mike Lewis. My main concern, yes, we have got to, it's a planning issue. My main concern is what the Cabinet Member for Education have just stated, sends out alarm bells to me, and also social services. I'm in the middle of the deep blue sea. I haven't made my mind up on which way I'm going to vote. Thank you.
No other speakers, no other hands up. Liam, did you want to come back with anything? Or?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's just really to reiterate, I mean, we do seem to be straying a lot into non-material planning grounds, and it was something I was trying to alert members to, and some have picked up on it. Really, we've got to consider this as a use of land and buildings. Is the use of land and buildings in this location acceptable? Yes, there are grounds which you could refuse the application on, but I don't feel you could refuse it on principal grounds. You would have to look more at amenity space and highway space. Now, is it unacceptable in terms of the parking arrangements? Well, you've got 2 parking bays there. It could be a large family house. There could be a number of people living in there. It could be a HMO. We've already granted consent for HMO use at the property. It could be a commercial let-in, like a B&B. So I suspect that is why it's been advertised as a B&B, because there is a planning permission in place to use it in that respect. So a lot of what's being covered is going into matters of control, which we as planning officers are not there to control. Except it should be a one council approach in that respect, but it is difficult on these grounds because we are looking at things from a material planning perspective, and is the use of the property as a C2 acceptable, having regard to the other mix of uses. We are focusing so detailed at this stage where we are looking at land use. So it's really to have that in mind, really, when you're considering voting. Approval would have to go to the Care Inspectorate Wales. So we aren't the regulators on this. It would have to go there. Yeah, there could be strain on services, but what are those strains, and how could we, through a planning permission, control it? I think we'd have, except the report concentrates on the education impacts, and yes, there might be other impacts as well. But what information do we have that we could use to substantiate those claims? I think it'd be very difficult. So yeah, amenity space, I accept it's quite a small area, but it is an existing small area. I mean, it is a city centre location. We're not going to have substantial garden areas in city centre locations, and I think we just need to be mindful and flexible of the location we're in, particularly the location across the road from the beach, the walks there. Comments about children running out from the grounds onto the road. Well, if anyone's been to the site recently, you see that there's quite a high gate and fence there. So I think they would struggle to actually run straight out onto the road. And it is an existing situation. So there is an existing premises that could be used by children. So again, we're focusing very finely on details which we feel aren't material planning grounds that you can use to refuse an application. So really, just to reiterate that, I mean, as a planning authority, we're charged with determining applications that come before us, looking at our LDP, and does it fit with that? In this instance, we feel it does, and our recommendation is remaining of approval. So what we would hope is, if members are going down the refusal grounds, then we have strong reasons to defend if we are to go to refuse the application. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, before I called you, now Jonathan's hand has gone up, and Matthew. Jonathan, did you want to come in? No.
Apologies, thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to really emphasise what Liam said, is that members must make the decision on the planning material considerations. It was raised earlier about Section 106 contributions and adding that as a condition, but it wouldn't be possible in respect of general social services function to ask a developer to fund Section 106 contribution for that, because all Section 106 contributions must are required because of the impact of the development and the civil regulations, as are spelled out in your report. We wouldn't be able to justify a Section 106 contribution for some general social services possible issues which might result from the development. And as far as education, again, that's in your report. that there's capacity in the local schools, and in fact our SPG usually mentions that it would be 10 dwellings is when we would ask for an education contribution. So it would be reasonable for one dwelling to ask for an education contribution, especially as has been said that there is an existing consent for HMO or residential which could have children at the property. So I just would like to emphasise that for members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Matthew, got your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Only quickly on the parking. This is really a sort of an on-balance decision from us, really. As Liam said, the existing property is a big house. It's had a variety of uses, which would all generate a parking demand, and it didn't have any off-street parking. The proposed the levels of staffing that the applicant has indicated show we probably should have 4 to 5 spaces if it was a new build. They're providing 2, but you need to balance that up against the fact that arguably it's a very sustainable location. It's on a high frequency bus route. They're providing cycle parking. And is it an objection you could make and uphold if they're short of 2 parking spaces? Given the location, I mean, it's surrounded by a controlled parking zone. Staff wouldn't be eligible for permits in the controlled parking zone. And yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no other member wishes to speak? Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask? Matthew just said about a bus service going outside, but there are no bus stops along there. So I'm just wondering where the bus service is. Perhaps you could tell me. I'm a bit confused.
Oh, sorry, guys. The 4 and the 8 run across the front of it, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but where do they stop?
One stops by Swansea Baths, that's the first stop, and then the second stop is after it turns into the Civic Centre. They're all within, I mean, they're all within a reasonable walk.
Yeah. So we've got 2 routes. Right. No other hand up then? Okay, for this one. We've got happy from the officers and the local members and the objection plus the applicant. And be reminded that this is a planning application. It's all that we can only look at it from that viewpoint. And so we can now go to the vote if you like. And
yeah, vote is down here. They take over. So, councillors, there are
4.
Councillor Peter Black.
4.
Councillor Gilbert, John. Yes.
Sorry, against, and I'll give my reasons later.
Councillor Will Allen.
4.
Councillor Mary Jones.
Against.
Councillor Mike Lewis.
4.
Councillor Richard Lewis.
Abstaining.
Councillor Deb Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Linda Taylor Lloyd.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Mike White. Councillor White.
4.
4. Councillor Cornwall. That's 6-4, 4 against, 1 abstention, so that's carried.
thank you. And next item on the agenda, item 2, page 20, by it's the Applicant.
Thank you, Chair. Ian's going to do a presentation for me on this. If he can set it in motion, please. Okay, it's an application for a variation of condition to amend plans for various house types and the turning head at Upper Bank in Pentre-Chwyth. I'd just like to refer members to the update sheet to start off with, please. You'll note there are 2 errors in the planning obligations section on page 43 and an amended recommendation to include reference to a new section 106 agreement / deed of variation. So I'd just like to point out at the outset that in terms of the planning obligations, nothing has changed from the previous permissions on site. All we're doing is looking to link this permission to the section 106 via a deed of variation. So in terms of the site plan, if you can go to that, please, Ian. The application has been reported to Planning Committee as the original planning permission exceeds the committee thresholds of 20 dwellings. Members may recall the original planning permission was varied via a Section 73 application last July. That was to amend the approved levels in relation to plots 206 to 210 and 213 to 217. So the current application proposes a further minor amendment. So the red edge is the site of the aforementioned application for 107 dwellings, with the dotted site the location of the 149 dwellings permitted under the original scheme. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian. This is an aerial view from Google. So the site has been cleared and the original development is under construction, progressing northwards towards the current site. So the development has progressed further than that indicated. The application site is at the northern end of this cleared site where it says Scott's Road, if you can actually see that on the plan. And then if you can go on to the next slide, please, Ian. Thank you. This is the previously approved partial site layout. So on the right hand side, you have the site layout and the red arrow indicates the area within the site that is subject to this application, shown as hatched. So on the left-hand side is the approved layout for the site, and the key area to note is the turning head at the top of the screen and dwellings above this and the hatch section in the middle. So effectively, this turning head is being reduced in length. The garden and parking areas for plots 247, 248 and 249 are changing, along with the dwelling type on 246 and 247. So if you can go to the next one, please, Ian. As I said, this is the proposed amended layout. You'll see the dwelling type on plots 246, 247 is been amended from a 3-bed dwelling to 2-bed dwellings. They have been used elsewhere on the site. The turning head is reduced. Sorry, just getting feedback then. The turning head has been reduced in length, but the applicant has provided auto track to show that a lorry and parking a lorry can manoeuvre within there, and the parking has been amended between 250 and 253, which has resulted in larger gardens for plots 247, 248 and 249. The siting of 253 and 254 has marginally shifted as well to facilitate the above amendments. If you can go to the next one, please, Ian. This is the revised dwelling type for plots 246, 247. It's been used elsewhere on the site and is considered acceptable within that street scene. So in summary, there have been no neighbour objections to the proposal. The local highways authority have no objections to the proposed amendments, and neither do the council's placemaking department or Dŵr Cymru Welsh Water. The drainage officer does object on the basis that SAB is required, but this is a separate issue under different legislation, and the surface water condition has been amended accordingly. So in summary, the changes are relatively minor, and as noted above, the amended dwelling type is appropriate. The garden areas to 3 properties would be increased, which is an improvement. There are no highway issues to the parking area or turning head amendments, and the local highways authority aren't objecting. And finally, the conditions have been updated where necessary, as a number have been discharged and the section 106 would be varied to reference to this permission. So the recommendation is for approval, subject to conditions and a variation of the section 106, which won't change from the original application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew, and for your briefing there. Councillor Des Thomas, you can hand it. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. a comment and a question. I mean, the houses look awfully small, but and the whole site looks dense, highly compact. Where are there any public open spaces on this development? Can they be outlined, please?
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Ian, do you mind putting the scheme back up, please? It's worth noting in terms of this application that all the applicant is seeking for is amendments in a very small part of the site. So irrespective of what happens on this development, on this application, if you go back up, please, Ian. The previous permissions which are being built out will continue to subsist. If you can go up again, please. So yeah, you'll see, as I said, on the right hand side of that is the development as approved. So we're actually looking at a very small part of that development, but there is open space around, and I believe it's in the original phase 1. So in the bottom left hand corner, I believe that is open space on the site. But notwithstanding that, we're obviously only looking at the changes that are part of this application to, as I said, about 6, 7, 8 properties. So that's all we're considering at this point as part of this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, there is on there already installed. No other hands up to speak? Okay, no? Okay, then we will move to the vote on it. Which one is of approval? And
Councillor Anderson.
4.
Councillor June Burtonshaw.
4.
Councillor Will Evans. Councillor Evans.
4.
Mary Jones.
4.
Mike Lewis.
4.
Richard Lewis. Councillor Richard Lewis. No, he's left. Okay. Councillor Des Thomas.
4, Chair.
Councillor Untitled.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Mike White.
4.
Councillor Paul.
Yeah, 4.
Okay, well, that's unanimous. Anyway,
Right, thank you.
oh
yeah.
Just calling Councillor Black back into the meeting.
Okay. Right, thank you. And excuse me, we move on then to item 3, which you find on page 15 of the report, is the formal noise club, which we deferred from last meeting for business.
Thank you, Chair. I'll present this one. So yes, this item was deferred at the last planning committee to allow a member site visit to take place. So that actually happened last Tuesday. So we got a chance to look at the building in its context, walk around the perimeter, and there's been a few matters which I'll come on to shortly just to discuss. So you got the site location there. I've got I put a couple of slides on to show the site in context for any members who weren't able to get to the visit. As you can see, the view there from a bird's eye perspective. Just cycle through a couple of the shots here. So there's a view from the main access road, and then that's a good shot there. And then there's a photograph on the next slide, which I actually took at the visit, so just so that members can appreciate what we're looking at. So really, in terms of comments, at the last meeting there was some discussion about vehicle barriers, and whether there was a need to remove or recite these. I mean, our original report had said the words all of the barriers, but I think we could all see on the site visit that it was actually reciting those barriers that was to be carried out. And our report has been updated and reflects that approach. There were some comments raised at the visit about the proximity of mobile phone masts to the building, and was this appropriate? So in response, we've prepared information on your update sheet. So what that essentially sets out is that telecommunications infrastructure are required to meet the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Guidelines, or ICNIRP for short. Both masts at the site have been subject to the planning process previously, both been submitted with certificates which confirm compliance with those guidelines. When you look at planning policy Wales sets out policy and guidance in that respect. It says, and this is quoted on your update sheet, providing that the development meets the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection Guidelines, planning authorities should not consider the health aspects of mobile telecommunications equipment. All new base stations are expected to meet those guidelines. So on that basis, we have no reason to suggest that the location of the masts in proximity to the development and proposal in this respect. We have no reason to suggest it's unacceptable on health grounds or any evidence in that respect. The matter has been raised with the applicant, who confirms that EE, who are the providers of the masts, they've previously visited the site and haven't expressed any concerns regarding the proposed use. They have also emailed EE for an up-to-date copy of the ICNIRP certificate and have suggested that they could send that to us. A separate comment that we looked at it on the meeting was discussing the design of the building. The potential to retain some reference to the boys' club and the facade, so paying cues to the former design. So you could see the application plans there, the top shot, so it shows the general approach that's been proposed, which is render and a different coloured render. So at the meeting we discussed, could this be broken up with some form of brickwork? And the applicant has been asked, and they would accept some sort of brickwork on that facade, which paid cues to the previous entrance, as well as retaining a sign then that says Boys Club on the front. They probably wouldn't be able to retain the existing sign, as we could see. It's been on a fire damaged building, and it'd probably be a difficulty getting it off, but they could supply a new sign to that respect. And condition 9 of your drafted conditions would deal with that. It deals with the finishes, and we can control the finishes in that respect. An issue was raised about potential amenity and standards of amenity. So as I said on site, effectively the plans they set out proposed layouts and the committee report, and in the committee report what we've done is identified the overall picture, and we did identify one of the flats which had a high level window looking towards Berwick Terrace, which wasn't ideal in that respect. Looking on plan, just to make it out, if we go back to the other, right, okay, so we've got the ground floor in the center of the plan, really. Yeah, just remember that. And in the center of the plan, we've got apartment. Yeah, just up a bit. It's served off the hallway, so to the right of where your cursor is now, down slightly. So this flat there, where the cursor is on, basically has one high level window serving it from the front, and then a window at the back, which is a standard window. So we were just raising, well, it hasn't got an outlook we would normally seek a standard size window. When we look at the elevation, so if we go back to the elevation plans, I think it's the next one. Yeah, so you can see sort of the bottom image there, the window sort of to the left of the cursor, up slightly. I think is number 02 is on, so to the right of that. it's a high level window, and normally we'd ask for, you know, a standard size window there, but we did identify that. But and the scheme has been scrutinised by a placemaking and heritage team, and we found that on balance it is acceptable as a scheme. I mean, the scheme does offer a lot of viewpoints looking back into the city, because that was something we looked at on site and sort of talked about, well, where are your viewpoints from the flats coming from? So on the back of the building, really, it looks over the city, so your prime viewpoints are coming from there as opposed to back onto Berwick Terrace. So in respect, those are really the issues that came out of the visit. Happy to look at any questions members have got and go from there. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Any members to vote? Councillor Hans. Yes. Oh, sorry, no, sorry. Let me just go back. Councillor David Phillips. My apologies. One of the ward members. Councillor Phillips. Yeah. Yeah. Go on, mate. Just back on mute, David. Yeah. There you are.
Thank you, Chairman. With your agreement, I'll be speaking for my ward colleague, Councillor Fiona Gordon, who had intended to be here but has been detained by day job commitments. So if you'll be, I don't think I'll need two people's time, but if you'd be a little tolerant if I run over my own 3 minutes or 5. Is it 5 or 3 minutes, I guess? Anyway,
we can double that.
The committee have now been to the site and have seen the complex developments and will appreciate the stunning outlook as well as the complex issues to do with access. Very limited, restricted width, difficult road access, especially for large planted vehicles that will be required during the construction phase. I want to make clear that Councillor Gordon and I and neighbours are not against development on the site. We want something to happen there. It's a mess. But we don't agree that anything is better than nothing. Indeed, I've worked hard with colleagues, both council and private, over many years to establish a workable community facility. And I was a bit upset by the suggestion that there's no demand for it. That's simply untrue. We did, in fact, have the Boys and Girls Club of Wales were going to move into it, but the death of their Swansea-based chairman brought that to an end. As Councillor Gordon would have said to committee, the regeneration, which he now leads by councillors in the community adjoining it, Brynidon Park, previously forgotten, which is immediately below the Boys and Girls Club, immediately below it, demonstrates the desire for community use. There's nothing in the immediate area, which is one of the areas of greatest deprivation in Wales. On behalf of residents, we do express some concern that it is reported on page 54 that there were no representations from the public, when in fact there were. This is clear from the ASB PAC report in the full 73-page document application pack, which is available online and which sadly I've read. These were about parking, water runoff, opening up of Berwick Terrace and loss of amenity. So to talk about the appearance, well, of course, it's better than what's there now. What wouldn't be? But what would it look like in 10 years' time? As we can see from other elevated weather-exposed rendered buildings in Swansea, they get dirty and cracked. Report says that the application provides uninterrupted render, creating a bland and uninteresting facade. Is that acceptable in such an iconic elevated location, visible to all approaching from the east? Are we really to have people living in what is said to be below standard accommodation? Kitchens with no windows, flats below ground level with little light. It doesn't sound like the sort of thing that, with all its other grand development plans, the City of Swansea should actually be doing. We don't think it reflects well on the city at all. The Placemaking Heritage team made several adverse comments on the proposal and recommend refusal unless all of their issues were rectified, but then changed their mind, even though most of their issues were not rectified. The report doesn't make clear why they did that. Perhaps the committee would like to ask. Planning officers state that the reduced standards are allowed because of the viability of the scheme. Previous application that I was involved in here this afternoon talked about we can only deal with planning considerations. Is the viability of the scheme a valid planning consideration? The viability of the site, i.e. its difficulties, would have been reflected in the price paid for it to Swansea Council. Why then should we compromise further, putting the lives of the building's tenants as less worth than the developer's profits? Parking. This is, as you will have appreciated from your visit, a major issue for residents. The shortage of 7 car parking spaces is allowed because already a shortfall is from its use as a social club, which is what it says on page 64. This building was never a social club in the sense of users arriving and departing by car. It was a boys and girls club. As the shortfall is provided by the construction also of a cycle shed. As Councillor Gordon said in her submissions, which I'm reading from, as a regular cyclist, I would not like to live in this development while having to rely on a bike to getting around. Going to town would be easy and fast. Coming back, not so much. She believes that new residents will feel the same and will use cars, and those vehicles will be displaced into surrounding streets, particularly Baptist Well Place. A couple of other issues. There's a considerable amount of groundwork engineering which is just outside the coal mine boundary, which will require adequate supporting and retention walls. It's not clear whether the building work will require piling or any other sort of percussive intervention. I only mention that because as the gardens of 2 of the houses in Baptist Well Place, one of them has already collapsed and is impacting the one above it, which may well itself collapse, which may then impact on the houses. And their owners and residents are actually very frightened that any work on the site could actually trigger further collapse. It's now clear that it's always been the intention that Berwick Terrace would be opened up for the period of construction. It could be opened up permanently. I do believe that should have been explicit in the paperwork. It was not. The opening up of the road, even during the period of construction, is a matter of great concern to local residents, especially those in Baptist Well Street. However, the question remains, even if it's opened for construction period only, how construction plant of vehicles will access the site. Whether they come from Town Hill Road, Longridge and High View, or Berwick Terrace, North Hill Road and Mount Pleasant, because you're not going to be able to get up North Hill from Devati, the road's working the wrong way. These both involve traversing very narrow residential streets with cars parked both sides, with children, tight right and left-hand turns onto an adverse gradient for large, long, heavy-laden vehicles. The report also makes no mention or provision of the hours of working, which, given its proximity to houses, I think is essential. The traffic would provide substantial loss of residential amenity for the whole of the unspecified construction period. Councillor Gordon and I looked at the site, and we would like planning officers to reconsider the original idea, which they dismissed, of using part of the closed highway, Berwick Terrace, as parking, not only for the displaced residents and their visitors, but Baptist Well Place residents as well. If the road is going to stay closed on a permanent basis, I don't quite understand the logic of saying you can't park in it, because no other activity is going to take place in it. It's just going to be an area of dead road. There are actually 2 blockages in the terrace with a large area of out-of-sight no man's land between them, and you probably saw that on your visit to the site. This dead area is used for the most extreme fly tipping. It is really awful. We could use this development to tidy up Berwick Terrace and stop the fly tipping. In the photograph the officer showed you, you can't actually see it because it's all below the vegetation that's grown up through it, but it's enormous. Mattresses, sofas, I don't know, there might be stuff that's toxic. I've no idea. There's a huge amount of stuff being thrown down the bank. My colleague and I are aware that residents believe they're going to have to suffer a long period of upset while this development takes shape, especially on vehicle traffic to and from the site. And they will be really upset when they learn that the road is to be opened. This is involving people in North Hill who've never been concerned about this before, because I don't think they thought they were involved in it. There's been no discussion with them or local members on this very important issue. As it stands, I think that this development misses an opportunity to sort out the Berwick Terrace fly tipping problems once and for all, and provide a much pleasanter aspect to the development and its residents, and allow decent parking area and a possible community seating area or the like immediately outside this particular development. I believe that discussions with local members could produce an acceptable resolution of our concerns on these issues if the committee is minded to approve the application, as well as improving the blighted area. Councillor Gordon, however, and I both consider the application to be inadequate. That does a discourtesy to the community in which it will be put. I was out for reasons connected with the events on Thursday and was stopped by residents in Baptistwell Place who said to me they wouldn't put this, I'm sorry Des, out in West Cross or the Mumbles. They're only putting it here because this is Town Hill or near Town Hill. I don't think that that is the case. I understand the difficulties about the site. I've made my comments on that. But the developer and the council here have the opportunity to provide a truly iconic building that respects its location, the community in which it will sit, the western pillar of the entrance to the Swansea Valley, which is what it is after all, a building that reflects its twin on Kilvey Hill on the eastern bank, and one which can take account of the future developments on that particular site. So our recommendation is we would ask you to refuse it. However, if you do proceed, you are minded to approve, we would ask that you adopt the following additional conditions or some other means of achieving these means regarding construction traffic, access and hours of working. So these are that the approval is conditional upon the determination of an acceptable safe construction site access travel plan. I know it was said at the previous meeting that this is normally done subsequently, but I think given the difficulties with this site, I think it should be part of the actual planning application. And that would include discussions with affected residents and local members, and take the opportunity to see whether we cannot meet and make improvements.
You've already taken up.
I'm just finished. I've got two more lines, Chairman. And improvements to the area generally to the benefit of everybody. The conditions are adopted to limit to reasonable hours, the working hours and the days on site. And I hope the committee will particularly remember that one. There's houses no more than 10 yards away. That the temporary reopening of Berwick Terrace for the construction period should include a condition that access is gated only. I'm very concerned that whilst I'm on my last point, Chairman, that I wanted to make this particular point in terms of a condition that to open it 24 hours a day for the construction traffic would not be a good idea, because in the hours it is not being used for construction traffic, it will be used as a rat run and opportunity for theft from the site. So there should be a controlled gate. And it makes explicit as well in the permission that the whole cost of all roadworks, road markings, tiers, consequent on this development are to be paid by the developer.
Thank you. I got 4 speakers here. Councillor Anderson first, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is an eyesore, we all know that. I got just 4 issues. Plant going to and from the site are coming in from Town Hill Road. Now, there's only 2 entries into off Town Hill Road onto one Wen, and that is Glenogwyn and Teagued. Now, these are highly populated streets. There's always cars, taxis parked there. So how are we going to get large lorries around onto One Wen Road? Can it be reassured possibly high loads turning right into Longridge with such a gradient of fear of turning over? Because as you know, there's a hell of a gradient there, and my fear is an high load, top heavy, turning right onto a gradient could topple over. Also, Councillor David Phillips picked up about working hours. There's no mention of working hours, and I know it's not a plan. I don't think it's a planning issue, but you know, for residents, can we have working hours? And if possible, will the people that got the not the provider, what do they call them? The owners anyway, could they adopt that little seated area on Berwick Terrace and fetch it in for somewhere for people to sit and enjoy the view? Thank you, that's all I've got to say.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a point really to the officers. When obviously we went all out on site there, the members were able to get there. And what I noticed, obviously, the rear of the building clearly is on the slope, and obviously picking up on the point of the local member about the issue of 2 walls of properties already collapsing. Is it possible that we could have had a structural report on the condition of the ground? Could that be acquired? We could ask the actual developer to carry out an inspection of the stability of the land, especially as it's on the bank, and it has obviously affected 2 properties there already. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Maggie Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the points that have been made previously, but I'm going back to the actual building itself and this window with this room. When we looked at the plan now on the screen, where is it in relation to the mast that's actually on the pavement? Because, you know, what is this window when it can be looked through? You know, what does it actually look out onto? And I'm not clear, are they going to knock the whole building down? Because obviously we were talking about the stone on site, and I understand we can't keep it. Yes, we would like a replica or whatever put on the front to show it was the boys' club. But if they're knocking the building down, then I'm really concerned that we've got such a very bland building going back. I know they're trying to have it in keeping to the building that's there, but it is such a prominent site that surely something better could have been put up there. And I also have concerns about the render, because even though we said, oh, render's moved on, it is actually, you know, again, in a very prominent area. It will get the wind straight off the sea. And is there a better finish that can be put onto it? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Burnshaw.
Thank you, Chairman. My apologies for not being on the site visit, but highways have already been adequately discussed by members. My concerns, as I raised last time, was in the accommodation on offer and about the lighting in the various flats. In the ones where there is no light in the kitchen, they have to open the door to have natural light in from the living room or the bedroom, which I don't think is appropriate. And the concerns I have on the lower ground floor flat, I understand this is a high level window and someone of my height is not going to be able to see out of it anyway. And on page 63, it says there is a shortfall in standards in this instance. And on 64, it says circumstances would not normally be desirable. How does this apply when you look at LDP SI1, health and well-being? How is this going to affect the tenants of these properties? And I'm very concerned about the layout. Could we have a map again of the flat so we can have a closer look at where the windows are in these apartments?
Yeah, we come back to that, Councillor. Next one is Councillor Des Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of matters. I think the telecommunication masts, when we commented those on site, personally, I was more concerned with the visual aspect than the health aspect. I wonder if those masts would have been put there if this development was put there prior to the masts. I think, you know, the masts are obscuring views one side and very close to the other side. I think there would have been a lot of objections if it was the other way around. Can we have a look at the proposed development, please? There was an overall picture of it's proposed to look like. Not that one, no, that's it, yeah. Yeah, highly desirable, I think not. It looks more like an institution, doesn't it? And this is going to be on a very prominent hillside on the outskirts of the city for everyone to see. That is disappointing, to say the least. I can accept the point of planning officers are making. It's better than what's there currently. After the site visit, and incidentally, I think the site visit was extremely useful and valuable for us to go and see. Having seen what's there currently, I can understand where that comment has come from, but it is a prominent position, and as I said, this looks more like an institution than anything else. Okay, the one-bedroom apartments, and again, you know, who are they catering for, and so on and so on. But I think we should be aiming for something better in this day and age. The Boys Club sign, I think it's important that that is kept. I think, I'm not sure if Steve Smith, the heritage officer, has been involved. It's important that we keep these parts of our heritage. I've been told the same story in the past. There was those of you who remember the old Swansea Hospital at the bottom of St Helens Road, when that was developed for the elderly people's apartments, they were going to demolish the whole site. I insisted that eventually that they keep the clock tower. The clock tower is still there, and it's part of the old hospital. There's a high water mark alongside the law courts, which was in the surrounding wall of the old tram depot that again was proposed to be lost. Originally, it's still in the wall there. If you look, they're all little parts of Swansea's heritage, and it's important that they be kept. And I think we should insist that all steps are taken to retain the sign that is above the doorway that says, you know, that gives the title of the Swansea Boys and Girls Club. I think that should be, if not as a condition, we should certainly refer it to the heritage section of the planning department. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on Councillor Phillips's comment about the placemaking and heritage team, original objections were removed, and I'd like to know why. Secondly, concerned by Councillor Anderson regarding hours of work. I totally agree. Is there a site management plan for construction on site? In other words, stipulating time of hours commenced no earlier or no later than a particular time. That needs to be in there. And the third point is going back to Councillor Des Thomas. I totally agree that we should be retaining the sign, and whatever way we can improve the architectural appearance of the building. I know they said they're going to do a little bit of brickwork, but what is that brickwork? So those are my concerns at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Linda Taylor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was excited to go to see this site, and I was hoping that it's going to be drastically improved. I want to support Councillor David Phillips and for fighting for everything he can for improvements on this area. I feel particularly strongly because I was born on Town Hill, and I really feel that we ought to raise the standard on and give people the very best. I mean, when Councillor Des Thomas and I walked along the road there, the lane, we could see the terrible tip and the area that people were tipping down the bank. I went the other direction while I was sussing out the area the day before, and I saw a beautiful terrace of houses and green opposite, and I was thinking how lovely we could surround that building and make it a pleasant aspect for people. So I agree with everything that people have said about the actual building, and I think it should be of a better standard and iconic and really sort of a good building to look at. But I also think that you want to spend more time thinking about the area around there and how you can make it pleasant and attractive and bring people's sort of emotional standard up by having somewhere nice to live. So I would say to Councillor David Phillips, fight for the people around there and get the best you can, the area surrounding as well. Thank you.
So Lewis, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't hear you call me in. I'm having a bit of difficulty hearing you. Yeah, I am still very uneasy about approving this application. Although the officers have given us the guidance on the telecommunications mast, when we were on site, there were warning signs on both masts indicating danger of radiation. As a councillor, my first priority would be for safeguarding. I've always been taught this from when I was first elected, and safety of the public is my main concern. The officers have indicated that the developers have said that the masts are compliant because they have been in contact with EE. We haven't got any concrete evidence ourselves that this is the case. We only have the developer's word for it. So I am very wary of passing this application this afternoon on that basis, as well as a lot of other issues that have been alluded to by other councillors and members on this call. So, Chair, I think I'm going to have to vote against this particular application this afternoon. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Will. I can see no other hands up. So, Liam, did you want to come back with anything on any response?
Yeah, I'll try and cover through the points raised. I'll start really with the placemaking and heritage response to the application. So going back to October 2020 was when our first response came from the placemaking team. They noted that it followed a pre-app of similar description. They supplied comments, which they are fully detailed in your report, which talked about some of the changes that had been made to date at the time on the application. From what I read in their comments, they were talking about window design and detailing and the provision of Juliet balconies and how the scheme could be improved in that respect. They talked about cycle storage needing to be secure, not going down the line of hoops, for example. And then at the end of that response, they say this is a visually prominent building and at present the proposal is not acceptable and refusal is recommended unless the issues can be suitably rectified. So following on from that, the applicant has gone away and come back with amended plans that have looked at providing Juliet balconies and some changes. Yes, they may be small tweaks to the scheme, not substantial in that respect, but at the same time, there was no substantial objections raised to the principle of developing the site. And then amended plans came in January of this year, and the team leader for placemaking and heritage has provided a reply saying, with the amended drawings showing larger windows and additional Juliet balconies, the proposals are acceptable and approval is recommended. Given the exposed location, the proposed render may weather badly, and there have been bad examples of this in Swansea. Therefore, we'll need to ensure an appropriate render specification as anti-fungicidal coating and possible rough cast and detailing, such as projecting drips to shed water rather than run down the facade. This can be covered by condition, but it needs to include agreement of specification, not just render appearance. So that was the response we had going back to January. So in our report and our recommendation, we've reflected that, and we've also put a condition on which would detail that treatment to the facade, essentially. So that's where we're at as officers, and it's not a case that planning officers have changed their mind in that respect. It's just a case of the development has been improved since it first came in October 2020. So there's other issues raised really in your debate just now. One of them was about the structural condition of the land, and whether we'd have details in that respect. I think Councillor White raised it. Condition 7 covers details of structures to be provided to the planning authority in terms of retaining structures. So we would be looking to secure details through that condition. Construction management, and a lot of issues being raised about construction access and site works, etc., which are issues raised about a lot of developments really. And we have to accept that there will be some disturbance, but at the same time it's a short-term disturbance as opposed to a long-term in terms of the planning, the life of the planning consent then effectively. Construction management plans can be used on developments, but I understand in this particular instance, the Highway Authority would need to agree to a construction method statement, and perhaps Matt can come in a bit later now to comment on that process, really, just to say what approval the applicants would need before they can actually commit to working off the highway there, and the types of access they would need to get in and do the works, because that was reflected in Councillor Anderson's comments as well about the sort of widths of some of the roads there in the general area. In relation to masts, what's the proximity to the window? I think Councillor Jones, you raised that point. I don't know if we can get the presentation back up on the slides there, just to show that elevation we were looking at. So if we scroll through to the front elevation, which is the next one along, right? So if you look, the window I was talking about is sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left across. So just where the sort of midway of the building. So the actual mast is to the right hand side of that sort of bit that juts back then, sort of thing. It's to the right, so it's in that approximate area there. So in my respect, in that respect, it's there, it's existing on the building. I mean, we have got a photograph of it. I think it's on the bird's eye map. I mean, we don't feel that itself is enough to refuse an application on grounds of amenity. In the report, yes, we've reflected on amenity and standards, and I mean, yeah, you can see it's sort of off that wing, that small bit that juts out. So yes, I mean, we've considered amenity in the round. We've noted that yes, there are parts which are not normally desirable in amenity terms, but it is effectively you have to consider the application as a whole, and there sometimes will be parts that you would like to change, or you think could be better, but ultimately we have to deal with it as put before us. I wasn't clear on one of the concerns raised about having to keep doors open on kitchen and living spaces. A lot of the flats, I mean, we can look at the ground floor plan and some of the other plans perhaps in terms of the layout of the flats, but a lot of them are open plan, so your kitchen and living spaces are open plan, and they are served by windows, and then the bedrooms are served by windows. So I wouldn't be, so you can, so if we look there, that's the ground floor area. So yeah, looking at that plan there, so you've got a kitchen, you've got a dining space, and that's the one we talked about really, that's served by that higher level window. And then it's got a bedroom at the back. So there's this, it's got two aspects. It's got the front and the back, and you do have viewpoints from both. I mean, you look at the other flats, then they've got that one to the left of it. It's got a kitchen, an apartment, and then a sort of Juliet balcony, you know, overlooking that area. So it has got, you know, it's quite a long room, and it's got the vantage point out the back of the building as opposed to the front there. And then similar on the other ones. And then the flats above take a very similar approach where they've got their viewpoint looking down towards the city. And then you can see, you could just make them out on that plan really. So your viewpoints are less focused on the Berwick Terrace aspect and more focused at looking out towards the city centre that way, and then your building entrance back the other side. So yeah, we, on the whole, it is acceptable on its planning merits, and yes, these are sort of small details that we were looking at, but we need to consider the picture as a whole, and we feel it is acceptable from a planning perspective. But we felt we had to mention it when we were drafting a report, just to bring it to attention that you know, we've looked at the details, and you know, we feel it's acceptable, and there's no place making objection to it in that respect. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else I've missed. If there's anything else, just raise it for you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Can we see the photograph that includes this the sign, the stone lintel with the sign in it? Incidentally, I appreciate the remarks on the render having fungicidal and the non-drip sort of thing. That's a good thing. Oh, we can't enlarge that anyway, can we? I mean, that looks like a concrete slab with the sign cut into it. And that looks as if it could be kept and enhanced and included in the development. And I think we should add that as a condition of approval. As I said previously, it's important that we keep these little bits of our heritage for future generations to know what was there prior to current developments. I would move that, Chair, if committee are of a mind to approve the application.
Mark, did you want to come in with anything? Liam, can we add that as a condition if it was possible? Mark first.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things that Liam did mention earlier on. This, obviously, the existing building doesn't have a legal vehicle access. So before they get anything onto site, any plant, they would be required to enter into a highway agreement to do that. As part of the application process for the highway agreement, we would require a construction traffic management plan, and they would have to detail all their access arrangements, routing of plant, types of plant, times of day they want to do it. They'd have to demonstrate to us that the routes that they're choosing are achievable. As Councillor Anderson said, there are some very, very narrow pinch points coming down Warnwen Hill, and a bit of adverse camber thrown into it as well, just to make things more awkward. But we would have to be satisfied that they can do everything and they can get the plant in that they need to get in. And if they can't, then they'd have to come up with a different plan to do it. I mean, you know, it could be have a compound off-site and bringing things in on smaller trucks, that kind of thing. But all options are available to us to make sure that we protect the highway for the existing residents, pedestrians, and everyone else who uses it. And the other thing was Berwick Terrace. I don't think there's any. There's no. I don't think anyone in the Highway Authority thinks that Berwick Terrace should stay open for any amount of time. Obviously, there will be occasion when they take the old barriers down to relocate them, that the road will be open in inverted commas. But I think during that time, we would insist that it was gated to prevent it being used for things that shouldn't be useful.
Councillor Burton-Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. Question I asked about the shortfall in standards and
Sorry. Sorry, Councillor Boyd. Sorry, I muted you. My mistake then.
how do the points I raised line up with LDPSI 1 health and well-being?
Yeah, okay. No other hands up. Lynn, the first one was about whether we can add that condition, and Councillor Thomas was mentioning, and any response for Councillor Shaw?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, in effect, you can add a condition to require retention of the sign, but we also got to be mindful of if it did get damaged, then you know, it may be more of a replica that would be needed as opposed to the actual sign. Just going back a bit, I mean, there was some comments about are they knocking the whole building down? It's applied for as a conversion, so it is a conversion scheme, although I understand because there's been fire damage, the upper floor will have to be completely demolished. So that's what the applicant is telling us. And they did agree to some form of brickwork on that front elevation and replacement sign to go with it, albeit accepting that we could put a condition on to say that the existing sign shall be retained, and other than that, it would be a replacement. Coming on to the amenity aspect, I'm not clear in my mind where the impact is coming from that the Councillor Birkinshaw is raising the issue on. I mean, is there a specific flat that you're aware of that has a shortfall in standards? Because effectively we consider the scheme as a whole, and does it provide enough amenity space? It does, because each flat has got amenity spaces we set out to have. Does it have appropriate outlook? Well, we've said yes. You know, on balance, the outlook from the scheme is acceptable. Does it have enough natural lighting? Then yes, we feel it does. So our viewpoint is that it is acceptable on planning grounds. We just felt that it was necessary to bring members' attention to some of the finer points where, you know, an on-balance decision is made, because this isn't a science. It is effectively you're judging a scheme based on its layout, and there's no set formula to say you know, what is acceptable, what isn't. It is that planning judgment that officers have to come up against on every application, really. So I'd be happy to look at the scheme further. Councillor Birkinshaw wanted to just give some further details. Thank you.
Can I come back, Chairman? If you look on page 63, it says there is a shortfall in standards in this particular instance, but you're still recommending it goes ahead. And the lower ground floor flat, page 64, raises concerns. So to say that substandard accommodation in this area is fine, but as someone said earlier on, West Cross or Mumbles, it would be thrown out straight away, and that's why I raised that.
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you. Right.
Chairman, would you permit me for clarification? Mr. Boyer said.
Sorry, we can't.
Mr. Boyer said, Chairman.
I'm sorry, we can't, Councillor.
I've received clarification of what the officer said in terms of the conditions that I proposed about working hours. Does Mr. Boyer's conditions?
Sorry. It has been proposed that we add the condition by Councillor Des Thomas's proposal. Is there a seconder for that before we go?
Yeah, I'll second, Chair.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we can now move to the vote, which is one of approval, the recommendation. And we'll now take that vote. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson. Peter Black.
For.
June Burtonshaw.
Against.
Will Evans.
For.
Mary Jones.
For.
Mike Lewis.
Against.
Richard Lewis. Present. Des Thomas.
For.
Linda Tyler Lloyd.
Against.
Mike White.
For.
And Councillor Paula. For. That's 7 for, 3 against. That's carried with the additional condition regarding the site.
Okay, thank you all. Then we move on to item 4 now, the last item on our agenda is that application of 567 Petrogetting Road.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer members to the update sheet just to start off with. You'll note that the local planning authority were copied into one letter of correspondence reiterating previous concerns, raising concerns over transparency and advising of an illegally parked vehicle on Pentragetting Road. Since sending that out, the neighbour has contacted us. Apparently the vehicle wasn't parked illegally, but was causing an obstruction as it was there over 1.5 days. In terms of, as I said, the presentation, this application has been called into committee for decision by the ward councillors and has met the threshold for call-in as set out in the council's constitution. So the application site is a semi-detached 3-bedroom property located on Pentragetting Road, adjacent to the Carethian Cross local centre, and permission is sought to change the use from a 3-bed dwelling to a HMO for 4 people. So you'll see that properties to the northwest and on the opposite side are predominantly semi-detached residential properties with a grass verge along the frontage, and the local centre has an access spur serving frontage parking directly to the southeast of the site. If you could go to the next slide, please, Ian. This is an aerial view of the site from Google. The site is obviously indicated with an arrow, the red arrow annotated as Carethian Chip Shop, which is next door, and you can see that it has a decent sized rear garden and an extension on the rear is visible as well. So you've got the bus depot in the northeastern quadrant of the cross in the top right, with commercial premises located on the other 3 corners, and as I've just said, the parade of shops immediately to the south of the site. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian. These are site photos. As I said, the first top left is the front of the application site, showing the driveway leading down to the property with the corner of the fish and chip shop on the left-hand side. Moving clockwise, you've got a Google Street View image of the application site between the fish and chip shop and the neighbouring semi-detached property with further residential properties beyond. In the bottom right is a view of the frontage. Note the bollards on the pavement to stop unauthorised parking and the double yellow lines immediately along the frontage. And the bottom left is a wider shot of the pair of the semi-detached dwellings. If you can go to the next slide, please, Ian. So on the left-hand side at the top is the proposed first and ground floor plan, which proposed 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen and shower room at ground floor level. And the only internal alteration is the use of the store as a bedroom on the left-hand side of the house as you're looking at it. There are no internal changes to the first floor accommodation, with 2 bedrooms, a sitting room and a bathroom to be retained at first floor. In terms of external alterations, as you'll see on the right-hand side, a new door and window would be installed on the front elevation on the side extension store. So in terms of the application, we have had 5 letters of objection were received, along with a petition signed by circa 150 residents with concerns raised, including that the area should be kept as a residential area, concerns it would set a precedent, concerns over highway safety in terms of parking demand, given it's on a busy bus route, concerns over noise disturbance, antisocial behaviour, concerns over the prospective nature of tenants and the impact on property values. In terms of consultees, there have been no objection from the local highways authority, strategic planning and placemaking or pollution control. So from a policy perspective, the main policy is H9 of the LDP, which contains a prescriptive definition for what constitutes a harmful concentration or intensification of HMOs following a detailed evidence review. And as members will be aware, we've also got very detailed SPG, which adds further weight and helps interpret the policy. So the site is located outside of the HMO management area for LDP purposes, where the threshold is 10% of all residential properties within a 50-metre radius. So currently, there are no properties within the 50-metre radius that have planning permissions for a HMO use, and there are no licensed HMOs on the council's public register. So the proposal would therefore pass the radius test, equating to 4.35% of the properties. The application is not in a small street and would not lead to a C3 dwelling being sandwiched. In terms of the room sizes, as you'll note in the report, it is noted that the kitchen is slightly smaller than that recommended in the SPG. It's 5.12 metres squared, whereas it should be 7 metres. But it should be noted that this is the existing situation, and there's also a communal living area and a sitting room elsewhere in the property to ensure that there's adequate communal space within the property. A condition would be attached to require there to be no more than 4 residents occupying the property. The authority considers that the property has sufficient rear private amenity space, and it's not considered that the proposal would result in significant noise and disturbance over a 3-bed dwelling. And it must be remembered that the property is on the edge of a commercial area and pollution control haven't objected. From a visual perspective, the alterations to the front are considered acceptable. In terms of parking, the parking requirement for a 3-bed dwelling is the same as for a 4-bed HMO, so there's no change. And as I've shown on the photos, there are bollards and yellow lines along the frontage to prevent parking. A condition would be attached requiring cycle parking, and in any event, the site is located in a sustainable location adjacent to a local centre and on various bus routes. The makeup of future residents and the devaluation of property is not a material planning consideration, and there's no evidence of antisocial behaviour either. So the officer's recommendation is for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. And we got Gaynor and Kenneth Louis want to address this. You both here, Mr. Louis? You've got 5 minutes to address this anyway. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon all. We would like to bring to this committee our main points to uphold the objection to the proposed HMO application that's been submitted. Number 1, parking. Our concern is that this proposed HMO is for 4 residents to the property, will only allow driveway parking for 2 medium-sized vehicles. And where would these other vehicles be parked? Because you can't park in front of the shop because they are private parking facilities. Referring to the information given by Amanda Pugh in the Transport Department and is documented in the consultant's comments, it has been suggested for additional parking on the street, which according to the council information, it allows up to 7 vehicles to be parked. Since finding out this information, there have been just 1 vehicle parked legally on the street for a duration of 1.5 days, at which point the vehicle owner was contacted by the local authority, the South Wales Police, to force the removal of this vehicle. This was due to it causing obstruction to the flow of the traffic, the details of which can be found by contacting the South Wales Police and quoting the following case reference for a PC Ryan badge number and complaint number 567/230421 dated the 23rd of the 4th 2021. Our main concern is that any vehicle parked could cause a serious road accident or impede emergency vehicles, which has been stated in the objection by Dr. Ian Millington. Also, that this would cause major disruption and delays to the current bus service routes that operate via Pendragethin Road, therefore affecting the service provided to the general public. Number 2, security for homes and businesses. We have a post office, newsagent, pharmacy, fish bar, takeaway and funeral directors with a chapel of rest at the back. The property in this application has access via the rear garden wall to the rear entrance of locals. Businesses, as the property would have no long-term residents, i.e. a family, security would be on the minds of these businesses and employees. This is also a concern for local residents as crime in areas with HMOs are raised. 3. Purchase of the property. As per your policy H9 section 3.7.8, these HMO regulations state before a change of use from a C3 to a HMO can be considered, the premises should prove a C3 dwelling was unviable and has been on the market for at least 6 months. Is there evidence that this has been adhered to? As our own search shows that this was only on the market for less than 1 month, listed the 29th of January 2021, and that was with restrictions which was cash buyers only, which in our opinion is not allowing first-time buyers and or families to get onto the property ladder and therefore not adhering. Furthermore, this application was submitted to you on the 3rd of March 2021, again, not allowing for the 6-month period. Antisocial behaviour, crime, rising crime, drug problems and noise levels associated with HMOs are major issues and concerns for the residents and businesses alike. As outlined in the petition letter, which a copy has been submitted to you, this is a residential area with families, and so to have a rise in these criteria would result in a negative impact. This has been acknowledged by the complaint sections of your HMO licence policy and designation of areas for additional licensing documents 2020, which has been produced by your authority. Please refer to sections 1.8 and 1.9 of the document. When we can see that the information relating to this issue has been amended to include the statement, the behaviour of individuals or groups of individuals is not something that can be controlled by the planning system. Any significant antisocial behaviour issues would be dealt with by the police and other separate legislative regimes. However, we would argue that the planning department are in a prominent position in this matter. If the objection is for this application be upheld and its decision to refuse, this would avoid this issue. However, should the committee decide to approve this application, then this committee is allowing the behaviour to become an issue and for other departments of the authority to deal with it. And to that point, we would like to point you to your policy PS2 section 3.5.22, where an assessment should be made, as this can harm neighbours' quality of life, which if you aren't taking the antisocial behaviour issue into consideration, then in our opinion, you are not committing to your duty for the well-being of the community by ensuring a healthy and safe environment. Number 5, placemaking and strategy planning. The radius 50 metres test is only included in residential properties, but not schools, churches or businesses. We would like to ask the question why, as HMOs have an impact on the whole community, even more so in this case due to the close proximity to these premises. And finally, the community. With regards to the amendment noted in the agenda communication, stating that notification letters were sent to 4 neighbouring parties, I would ask that to be looked in at again at the addresses where these were sent to. We were the only property in the area that received this notification. All residents are concerned about the group of single occupations that reside in the property, especially with 5 schools in close proximity. We have 3 primary schools within walking distance of the proposed HMO. There is also a Welsh-speaking comprehensive school, along with a new comprehensive, which is under construction and is due to open later this year. Children will walk to and from school and frequent the local shops, which include the businesses Creeth and Fish Bar, which is directly next door to the property proposed for the HMO. We put it to you, the committee, that if the property became a HMO with all the uncertainty, could you be confident that it would be in keeping with the local authorities' well-being guidance for a healthy and safe environment for the future generations? We, the public, would like to remind the committee that the planning system exists to protect public interest and not private interest. We say that this, as all the statements you, the planning, have supplied are in favour of his private interest, and not one of ours, the public, has been upheld. We believe that the public comments and over 150 signatures submitted to you objecting to this proposal is showing you evidence of the voice of our local diverse community of residents and businesses around Creeth and Cross and beyond. Stating to you the profound effect this application for the HMOs poses, to which we seek your decision to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your local member first, and then Councillor Will Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. My concern again is...
Where we go?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. My concern is with parking. There's going to be 4 residents in this property, possibly with a car each, and I think there are only 2 parking spaces within the inside the proximity of the house. But it planning does say, not planning, highways say there are further parking along the street. But because this is mainly a residential area, those parking places along the street are used by the residents of those properties. And if 2 more cars were added, there would be conflict, I know, between neighbours over parking. Can you remind me? I think there is no need to stipulate the number of cars parking places for HMOs with 4 people or under. And if we could look again at the parking.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Will Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I reiterate what Councillor Burtonshaw just mentioned. I've got concerns about exactly the same thing. The location of this HMO is in a very, very busy location at Coreething Cross, very close to a set of traffic lights. So on-road parking, I know there's yellow lines outside the property. So there's only provision for 2 off-road parking. And as Councillor Burtonshaw said, there's 4 residents. So am I right in saying, because I haven't got the picture in front of me, but the driveway itself would mean that the 2 vehicles would be sort of behind each other on that drive, which isn't very suitable. Can I have another look at the picture? Is the drive wider, or is it a single drive?
We'll have a look at that straight now. No other hands up? Thank you. Andrew, did you want to? Well, we can have a look at that drive. Is there anything you wanted to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll cover the parking issue first. Obviously, it's been raised by the resident and the member as well. In terms of parking standards, you'll see that's a single drive there as existing. In terms of the parking standards, the parking for a 3-bed HMO would be exactly the same as it would be for a 3-bed dwelling would be exactly the same as it would be for a 4-person HMO. We've got maximum parking standards up to 3. And as I said, in terms of, obviously, there's a shortfall of 1 currently. We would find it very difficult to sustain a refusal on the basis that there's no change in the parking provision compared to who is living in the property. So as I said, if Matt wants to come into that once I've gone through everything else, then by all means he can. But it's also worth remembering, as you say, it is in a mixed use area in terms of you've got a parade of shops nearby, and therefore it's in a sustainable location on 2 bus routes. So there are facilities nearby as well. And notwithstanding that, we have recommended and included a condition with regards to cycle parking as well. In terms of security for homes and the rear access, then, as I said, we can't look at, from a planning perspective, who is residing there. It doesn't matter in that respect. It's a HMO. It could be for professionals, could be for students, could be for anyone in terms from a planning land use perspective. And the fact there's access at the rear lane doesn't indicate that there's going to be security issues when that access already exists. The reference is made to marketing. The reference is with regards to marketing in the LDP is in exceptional circumstances where a proposal exceeds the limited threshold in the area. As I said, in this case, it's outside the management area where the threshold is 10%. With this property converted to a HMO, you're looking at 4.35%. So you don't need to go into any exceptional circumstances because it's already policy compliant. In terms of well-being, as I said, we've got no evidence that there's going to be antisocial behaviour associated with this use, any more so than any residential use anywhere in terms of whoever's living in a property. Comments were made by Mr. Louis with regards to the LDP and why commercial properties have been excluded. Again, the LDP has gone through a thorough examination. That was considered as part of the examination, and they have been. So that's the policy where we have to determine the application within. And as you'll all know, we have to determine in accordance with the LDP unless material considerations indicate otherwise. In terms of consultations, we have consulted with 4 properties, and notwithstanding that, also put a site notice up as well. So in terms of planning legislation, it's an either-or scenario, and we've done both with regards to that. So I don't know whether there's anything Matt would like to specifically address with regards to parking that I haven't previously covered. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. And then, yeah, Matt, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I think Andrew covered it all. The supplementary planning guidance parking standards would require 3 spaces for up to 6 sharing in an HMO. A 3-bedroom semi-detached property would require 3 spaces. So the existing property has a shortfall of 1, and the proposal also has a shortfall of 1. So I don't see that there's any objection that the Highway Authority could make.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Mary Jones.
Yes, thank you. It's the photographs. I couldn't quite understand them. I'm assuming that it's not the garage originally alongside the property. I know it was mentioned about a storeroom, because when you look at it, you've got the double gates on that aspect, and then you look at the photograph underneath, and you've got a rather large hedge and no gates, but then they don't seem to work out properly from where we're looking. Is this storeroom being knocked down? Because you said something about a window going in it. So could you explain a little bit more about that?
Certainly. So the storeroom, as I said, in terms of the photos, it's not actually used as a garage currently. It doesn't have a garage door on there. It has a door and an infill panel. So the storeroom is being converted to additional living accommodation, where they're putting in a door and a window into that elevation, which, as I said, any resident could do if, for example, at the moment, in terms of it being a residential property under permitted development rights.
Sorry, can I ask, is it up to standard for a living accommodation? Because it's from the photo I'm obviously looking at, it doesn't look as if it's very substantial. So I can't quite understand how it can now become living accommodation. I thought you had to apply for permission, as you said, unless it's permitted development rights, to change a garage because you're losing a space by converting that. So can I have another explanation? And has anybody else got a lot of hands going up their screen? Because I have. There seems to be strange things happening here this afternoon.
Not voted yet.
One of the members is pressing buttons, I think.
Thank you. Sorry, if I just come in, there's no restrictive conditions in terms of the alterations proposed. So the resident, that storeroom could be converted to additional habitable accommodation from a planning perspective without needing any sort of change. Thank you.
I got 2 hands here. Are they legacy hands or are they backup? Councillor Evans and Councillor Burtonshaw.
Okay, Councillor Evans.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to just the officer's comments on that, what does the previous planning history of the building tell us? Was there a semi-detached garage attached to it at one time? Because this application is failing on, they need an extra parking spot. But the planning officers are telling us, well, we can't refuse it. We're either going to work on figures that are in our policy or we're not. So they're one short on parking at the moment, that's how I read it. I think Matthew said that. So if for instance, there was a garage there at one time and they've converted it to another use, that's fine, but it does take away a parking spot. So if there was if it was a garage there, you could put 3 vehicles on there. Can you explain that?
Okay, we'll come back for you now. And Councillor Burton-Shaw, did you want to come back?
Yes, please. I was going to raise the same point as Councillor Evans, not about the garage, but you say policy is there must be 3 parking places, but there's only 2, so we can let it through. Why do we have policies, guidelines set down if we don't adhere to them?
Okay. Right. No one answer. Anything?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. In terms of the first point, historically, whether the property was built with a garage, I suspect they were along there. But historically, the planning authority didn't tend to remove permitted development rights to make alterations, which we would do now with most modern housing estates, depending on how much car parking they have. So they can convert that building, that storeroom, without needing any permission in that respect. There's nothing that the authority can do about that, as long as it meets the permitted development criteria, which I suspect it would, because as I said, if you're just changing the front elevation from a garage door or an infill panel and a door to something that matches the appearance of the dwelling, in the main, that will be permitted development. With regards to the policy perspective, we need to consider the fallback here. So the fallback position is it's a 3-bed dwelling that has car parking provision for 2 spaces at the moment. So the fallback position is that the proposal is for a 4-bed HMO which requires the same parking. So it would be very difficult to demonstrate any harm over and above this existing situation. What's also worth noting is that the car parking space has internal dimensions, the storeroom has internal dimensions of 2.32 metres in width. As you'll be aware, from the car parking SPG, supplementary planning guidance, an outdoor car parking space should measure 2.6 metres in width. And if you have one in a garage, we're normally looking for 3.2 metres to enable you to get in and out. So the any car parked in that storeroom would be substandard. Therefore, you'd struggle to get in and out. And that also lends us to consider the fallback is you're not effectively losing a car parking space because it's not being used as one. So the fallback position is, from a policy perspective, is the same. That's what we're trying to get across, and maybe not doing clearly, so I apologise. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, can I come back in, please?
Yeah.
There seems to be some conflict between Mr. Ferguson and Mr. Bowyer. Mr. Bowyer says that there has to be 3 car parking places. And it's not a 3-bedroomed house, it's a 4-person HMO. So why is Mr. Ferguson comparing it to a 3-bedroom house? There's some conflict there.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor. It's as a 3-bedroom house as it is at the minute. It would require 3 parking spaces if it was new. It isn't new, it's an existing dwelling and it's only got 2 spaces. As a 4-bedroom HMO, we would require it, the policy requires it to have up to 3 spaces for up to 6 residents. Parking standards are a maximum, so it's quite hard to, it would be very difficult to sort of to pin any kind of refusal on lack of parking, because the parking is very, well, it's the same for the existing use and for the proposed use.
Yeah, okay, so I've got no other members wish to speak. You can see the recommendation there is page 82 is one of approval, so we will now take a vote on that recommendation.
Councillor Sir Anderson. Councillor Anderson.
Approve.
Thank you. Peter Black.
4.
Jean Birkinshaw,
On planning grounds, I must approve.
Will Evans,
4.
Mary Jones,
4.
Mike Lewis,
4.
Richard Lewis, Des Thomas,
4.
Linda Taylor Lloyd,
4.
Mike White,
4.
and Paul.
And 4.
That's unanimous, 10 for and against.
Well, thank you all, and that concludes our meeting. And we'll meet again, if not before. We will meet on June the 8th. Thank you all very much.
Chair.
Thank you.
Chair. Councillor